It's November 19th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the G20 Leaders Summit in Brazil. President Yoon has pledged $10 million worth of humanitarian aid to help overcome the hunger crisis and poverty in Africa as part of a global project led by G20 member countries. Also at the G20 Summit, U.S. President Joe Biden once again urged his fellow members to support Ukraine's sovereignty and step up pressure on Hamas. And Tuesday marks 1,000 days since Russia launched offensives against Ukraine, while the European Union welcomes Washington's permission to use long-range weapons in Russia. Moscow warns the U.S. is fueling the fire. President Yoon attended the first day of the G20 Summit in Brazil, focusing on tackling global poverty and hunger. He also called for global solidarity on maintaining a rules-based order amid Russia and North Korea's military cooperation. Our Ocean reports from Rio.
President Yoon pledged $10 million to battle hunger in Africa and the ramping up of global food aid by 50,000 tons next year. This came as the South Korean leader attended the G20 Summit, which kicked off on Monday in Rio de Janeiro. After participating in the launch of the Brazil-led Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, Yoon set out South Korea's contributions and solutions. He announced Seoul will provide $10 million worth of humanitarian aid to address Africa's food crisis by the end of the year. He also said South Korea plans to ramp up its global food aid contribution by 50,000 tons to 150,000 in 2025 through the United Nations World Food Programme. Seoul has already doubled its contribution this year compared to 2023.
At this year's G20 Summit, President Yoon emphasized that achieving a sustainable future for humanity requires inclusive economic growth in developing countries. He stressed the importance of structural reform and fiscal innovation in developing nations to leverage the private sector's capabilities fully. He also argued that the G20, as the top forum for global economic cooperation, must support efforts to create new growth drivers in developing countries.
In this regard, Yoon announced South Korea's intent to increase contributions to the International Development Association by 45% compared to 2021. The IDA, as part of the World Bank, provides grants and low-interest loans to help countries invest in their futures. He also said Seoul will look to increase its contributions to the Pandemic Fund, which aims to strengthen pandemic prevention, preparedness and response capacities. Based on South Korea's own experience of rising from the ashes of war and poverty, President Yoon highlighted the country's role as a bridge of prosperity, connecting developing and advanced economies. The Yoon administration held South Korea's first ever bilateral summits with Pacific Island Forum countries and African Union nations, and plans to hold a summit with Central Asian countries in 2025. Furthermore, the president emphasized that economic growth of developing countries can only be achieved within the framework of a rules-based order, noting North Korea's large-scale troop deployments to Russia and that the Ukraine war has entered a critical phase. Yoon strongly urged Moscow and Pyongyang to immediately cease their illegal military cooperation. Yoon further appealed to G20 leaders to unite in their will and actions to uphold the global rules-based order. The leaders of Japan, Germany, Canada and Australia also criticised the Russia-North Korea axis, deeming it a threat to global security. On the sidelines of the multilateral summit, President Yoon also met with the leaders of MICTA countries, Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey and Australia for the third consecutive year. They adopted a joint statement reaffirming their commitment to cooperate on areas such as sustainable development, world peace and security and global governance. Amid growing concerns around the world over North Korea's collaboration with Russia, the MICTA leaders called on all UN member states to uphold the UN Charter and abide by Security Council resolutions. Addressing the meeting of the world's 19 largest economies, the European Union and the African Union, President Yoon on Tuesday will emphasize South Korea's role as a green ladder to help developing economies achieve both growth and carbon neutrality. Oseong, Arirang News, Rio de Janeiro.
Staying in Brazil, U.S. President Joe Biden, who's attending the G20 summit for the last time, reiterated his call for an end to the wars in Ukraine and in Gaza. Lee Seung-jae reports.
U.S. President Joe Biden is in Brazil attending his last G20 summit before the end of his presidency. There, he took the time to call for an end to crises unfolding around the world. Biden reiterated U.S. support for Ukraine's sovereignty while calling for efforts for a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas.
The United States strongly supports Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Everyone around this table, in my view, should as well. The United States has led the world in humanitarian aid to Gaza. And we're going to keep pushing to accelerate a ceasefire deal that ensures Israel's security but brings hostages home and ends the suffering of the Palestinian people and children.
Biden noted that the G20 this year is his last, and also called on world leaders to continue to assist countries in need to usher in a new era of sustainable development. Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping signaled a change in his foreign policy, as if the Chinese leader is preparing for worsening U.S.-China relations under the second Trump administration. During the G20 summit, Xi stated that the international community must build an open, inclusive, and non-discriminatory environment for mutual cooperation, and expressed Beijing's willingness to invest in developing countries. This marks a stark contrast to his previous give-and-take policy, as pundits say Xi may be looking to diversify its market in preparation for Trump's second stint in the White House. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has confirmed he will utilize the military for mass deportation of undocumented immigrants. Responding to a post by Tom Fitton, the head of Judicial Watch, a nonprofit conservative activist group who said that the upcoming administration will use military assets for a mass deportation program, Trump took to his social media and responded that it's true. The president-elect previously suggested he would declare a national emergency and use wartime powers and military troops to carry out a mass deportation. At least 10 people are dead after Russia launched massive aerial attacks on Ukraine's Black Sea port of Odesa on Monday. Our Kim Bo-kyung has the details.
With the Ukrainian war nearing its third year, Russia has launched its largest aerial attack on Ukraine in months. Its ballistic missiles hit Ukraine's Black Sea port of Odesa on Monday. At least 10 people reportedly have been killed and dozens wounded, according to the region's local governor.
I was pushed away together with the chair by explosion wave. I was making my way through the rubble. There were dead.
Russian ballistic missiles had hit a residential neighborhood and an apartment building, a university building, and an administrative building have been damaged, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Amid Moscow's aerial attacks on Ukraine, the outgoing U.S. President Biden has reportedly authorized Kyiv to use powerful, long-range American weapons in Russian territory. The State Department spokesperson did not comment on this directly during a briefing on Monday, but said that the U.S. had been clear to always adapt and adjust the capabilities the U.S. provides to Ukraine when it is appropriate to do so. To Biden's missile decision, the Kremlin previously accused Biden of escalating hostility over the war, saying it is obvious the U.S. wants to, quote, throw oil on the fire and escalate the conflict. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov added on Monday that Biden's decision is a qualitatively new round of tension. However, EU member states, including Poland's president, welcomed Washington's decision.
I welcomed this decision by President Joe Biden and our allies with satisfaction because I believe Ukraine should have the means to defend itself effectively.
The European Union's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, on Monday further urged member states to allow Ukraine to use EU-supplied arms to strike targets inside Russia, saying Ukraine needs to use the arms EU provides to not only stop the arrow, but also hit the archers. Meanwhile, Germany is to deliver 4,000 strike drones dubbed Mini Taurus to Ukraine. AFP reports that Kyiv is expected to receive these within the next few weeks. However, Germany reiterated it won't be sending its long-range Taurus cruise missiles despite Washington's recent decision. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
1,000 days have passed since the war in Ukraine broke out. And now that the U.S. is reportedly letting Ukraine use long-range weapons in Russia, will that become any game changer to ending the crisis? We're joined by Professor Joel Atkinson this morning. It's good to have you back, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to be with you again.
So, Professor Atkinson, some experts view that Biden's decision to allow long-range missiles in Russia is a warning to North Korea, which has dispatched troops to Russia. Do you also believe that this is so?
Yeah, well, it's more than just a warning to North Korea, really. Ukraine will now use those US-supplied ATACMS, these longer-range missiles, to strike targets not only in Russian-occupied Ukraine, but in Russia itself, and that includes North Korean forces. This relates to Russia's Kursk region. Ukraine took control of the Kursk Oblast in August, creating this buffer, drawing in Russian forces to reduce the pressure elsewhere. It also serves as a bargaining chip to help Ukraine secure an acceptable peace. However, Russian forces are still slowly gaining ground in Ukrainian territory, and the Ukrainian forces holding Kursk are under increasing pressure. Putin's using the North Korean troops he has to help in Kursk. And for some time now, Ukraine has been asking for permission to strike those forces, which includes the North Koreans as they assemble. And fearing that escalation, the US as well as France and the UK haven't wanted to do that. But now, following the involvement of North Korea and at the end of Biden's term, Ukraine has the green light.
Well, the question is, will it at least stop North Korea from sending its troops to Russia?
Yes, well, I think a long, complicated process has brought those North Korean troops to this point, and they won't be going home just because they're under missile attack. If the attack on Kursk fails, or if the North Korean troops experience heavy losses, in part due to those ATACMS, it may reduce the chance that the North Koreans will be redeployed to fight inside Ukraine, or it may make it less likely that Kim and Putin agree to send more North Korean troops.
Well, Professor Atkinson, Tuesday already marks 1,000 days since Russia launched offensives against Ukraine with, speculations that North may send more soldiers to Russia. But the question is, will the presence of North Korean forces in Russia make any difference in the conflict?
Well, I think they are making a difference, and we'll see more North Koreans will be sent if each side thinks it's worth it. It's difficult to know what that would mean, since we don't know what Russia had to give for those first 10,000 or so troops. On the other hand, they've now done it once, and that suggests they can probably do it again. And the longer Ukraine holds on, the harder it gets for Russia in terms of finding manpower, then the more Putin will want help from North Korea, and the more he'll be willing to pay. And if Kim is getting what he wants out of it, and if the deployment is not creating serious problems from high losses or defections and so on, then why not? And as I said, those North Koreans, I think, are making a difference. By all accounts, Russia is under real strain, but it seems Ukraine may be in an even worse situation. And if more North Koreans are sent, it will only get more difficult for Ukraine.
Then why is North Korea yet to comment on the U.S. presidential election results? I mean, it's been already 2 weeks since President-elect Donald Trump has been reelected.
Yeah, so that's not really surprising. North Korea doesn't usually comment on U.S. election results and only responds after the new administration kind of declares or states its North Korea policy. Presumably, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's statement calling for this limitless expansion of the nuclear arsenal is a comment on the election result in its own way. It's a warning to Trump that Kim is undaunted, but also sets the stage for possible negotiations. In effect, he may be saying to Trump, what are you going to give me in return for putting a limit on my limitless nuclear arsenal?
Right, not an unusual move for North Korea to, stay quiet on the election results. But in the meantime, the regime has resumed flying trash-filled balloons to South Korea. What's on the North's mind?
Yeah, that's right. Well, the thing to understand here is that just by existing, just by being a prosperous liberal democracy, South Korea is an ideological threat to the North Korean regime. It's not able to directly control South Korea, so it must try to get South Koreans to act to reduce that threat. So these ongoing trash balloons are an attempt to pressure the South Korean side to prevent North Korean defector groups and others from launching anti-regime balloons towards the north. The longer these trash balloons keep coming, the more pressure builds on the Yoon administration to put restrictions on those launches. And if he won't, well, then it creates an election problem for his side of politics, the Conservatives, until perhaps a president is elected who will be willing to restrict those launches.
Right, maybe a strategic move to keep the tensions high on the Korean Peninsula.
I think so, and it's very hard for Yoon to then escalate to create some leverage, as he'll be accused of provoking a war. And indeed, North Korea is a very credible and powerful threat. But, having said that, right now, it's hard to see Pyongyang wanting to risk a major conflict when some of its troops and weapons are on the other side of the continent over there in Europe.
Alrighty, Professor Atkinson, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us this morning. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Now, on the culture front, Korea has set aside this week for young artists in a special project to present what they've mastered. Culture correspondent Song Yujin has our story.
For young artists, the path to success is rarely paved with gold due to unstable pay and limited opportunities. However, for the performers in this play, that dream is starting to come alive. This production, titled Jojo, is the opening act of South Korea's first ever Young Artist Festival Week, where future stars in theater, classical music, ballet, and contemporary dance from the Culture Ministry's Young Artist Project perform after months of training. Earlier this year, 329 aspiring artists were chosen from an intensely competitive pool with nearly 10 applicants eyeing each spot. Over the past 8 months, they've worked alongside 9 national art companies, receiving training from experts and invaluable stage experience. These actors are part of the 40 young talents selected to train with the National Theatre Company of Korea.
We worked with 40 rookies with a wide range of experiences, learning styles, and skills. Our focus was on exploring how we could bring everyone together to speak with one voice. The process was an opportunity to delve into the core of theater as a collective art form.
After months of hard work, these actors finally took the stage to showcase their talent.
Even though some of us have already debuted, this program allowed us to step back, refine our skills, and re-enter the professional world with confidence. The National Theatre Company of Korea brought in incredible directors and instructors who taught us acting techniques, Pilates, and speech training.
What I gained most was learning from my peers. Working with 40 talented actors, I discovered so much by observing their strengths. It's an experience I'll carry with me forever.
The Young Artist Project is just getting started, with even more participants set to join next year.
We plan to include 600 participants. We hope these young talents can travel nationwide, performing in places that don't get the opportunities to enjoy cultural activities. It's about sharing their artistry with the people who need it most.
Young Artist Festival Week continues with performances by trainees of the Korean National Symphony Orchestra and the National Chorus of Korea on Monday, the Korean National Ballet on Tuesday, and the Korea National Contemporary Dance Company this weekend. Song Yujin, Arirang News.
Now, let's take a look at the stories from around the world with our Kim Xiang. Good morning, Xiang.
Good morning, Dami.
Why don't we start in New York City, where deadly stabbings were reported?
Yeah, that's right, Dami. A stabbing spree in broad daylight in the middle of Manhattan has left many New Yorkers in shock. Now, New York City police said 2 people were killed and 1 left in critical condition after a homeless man began what appears to be an unprovoked stabbing spree on Monday morning local time. Authorities also said that the 51-year-old suspect is in custody. The attacks began at 8:22 a.m. when the first victim, a 36-year-old Hispanic male construction worker, was stabbed in the abdomen while at work on the 444 West 19th Street. At 10:27 a.m., the assailants stabbed a 68-year-old Asian male who was fishing on 500 East 30th Street. Now, both men were pronounced dead after being taken to a hospital. A 36-year-old black female was stabbed multiple times near the UN headquarters almost 30 minutes later, leaving her in a critical condition. One witness said that the knife-wielding assailant was carrying a mask and 2 really big knives. Now, the NYPD Chief of Detectives, Joseph Kenny, said that the suspect had 8 prior arrests, with the latest in October this year, while NYC Mayor Eric Adams said authorities will look into why he was out on the street. Now, moving on to Australia, where influential media figure and ex-Australian national rugby team coach Alan Jones was arrested on Monday over allegations of sexually abusing 7 men and a 17-year-old boy. Jones, who anchored a popular Sydney breakfast show for some 18 years, now faced 24 charges, including 11 counts of aggravated indecent assault for alleged incidents from 2001 to 2019, which, except for 2 common assault charges, are all sex offences. The 83-year-old was taken into custody at his Sydney apartment on Monday morning, while the New South Wales Police Child Abuse Squad searched his property. New South Wales Police Commissioner Karen Webb said that they had conducted a very complex investigation and called for other victims to come forward, saying nothing is too old to be investigated. Super Typhoon Man-Yi, which swept across the Philippines over the weekend, has left at least 8 dead as local residents clean up after the storm's damage. Forecasters previously warned of a life-threatening storm surge, and some 500,000 residents were evacuated as the super typhoon made its second landfall on the country's main island of Luzon on Sunday. According to the Philippines news agency, Man-Yi's peak gusts were recorded at some 305 kilometers per hour. The super typhoon left heavy damage to homes and infrastructure, including power lines. Now, Man-Yi is the 6th typhoon to hit the Philippines in the span of a month. The cumulative death toll from the previous 5 typhoons was at least 160 people. Finally, to Ethiopia and the latest edition of the country's annual international 10-kilometer road race held in the capital Addis Ababa on Sunday. This year's Great Ethiopian Run International 10 kilometers saw 43,000 participants, some 5,000 runners more than last year's edition. The men's race was won by 17-year-old Binyam Mehari, who ran the 10 kilometers in 28 minutes and 26 seconds, while the women's race was won by Asayek Ayichu in 32 minutes and 14 seconds.
After the coldest morning of the season we had yesterday, the cold snap has eased just a bit, with cold wave alerts being lifted, but it still feels like early winter in many inland regions. But it's another pleasant morning for Jeju Island, waking up to a low of above 10 degrees Celsius. Speaking of which, Jeju had its longest run of tropical nights at 56 this year, so they deserve some nice, pleasant morning temperatures. Anyways, readings should go up higher than yesterday and hover above season norms for the rest of the week. Now, taking a closer look at today's highs, Seoul gets up to 10 degrees. Daegu, Gwangju should top out at 13 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Mostly sunny skies shine down with evening rain in the forecast for Jeju with a high of 17 degrees Celsius. Now, staying around average for the next 5 days with spotty rain in the forecast for west of central regions tomorrow, but that's not going to affect the temperatures much. Then a big winter chill awaits us next week. Well, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That's all we have for our morning edition of Arirang News. Thanks for watching.